A lot of my colleagues, a lot of my friends, and indeed family were shocked. Who would step away from a job at one of the great ancient universities of the world to come to a new institution that at the time only had 1 and a bit years behind its actual teaching? And the beauty of the decision to me is that although it seems a strange thing to do, it's actually informed by all of the factors and principles that a great university needs to survive. So what do I mean? I was in the Faculty of Classics within the broader School of the Arts and Humanities, but I'd come to see that the very humane element of the humanities, which was the beating heart for so long in the medieval and post-Renaissance university, had come to stop beating. There simply wasn't a shared investment in asking the big, enduring, and perhaps insoluble questions about the human condition, which is the very thing that created the works of art, literature, philosophy, theology that inform the humanities at large. So I felt there was a crisis of confidence in the institution and a fundamental loss of purpose. So I took a step back and reflected on what I really wanted to spend the rest of my career involved in. Because I can do research in the things I'm interested in, Latin literature, the survival of knowledge from antiquity through to the Renaissance. I can do that anywhere in the world. But what I can't do is work alongside colleagues and with students who are equally invested in building a shared intellectual community where the big questions matter. And I cast my eyes around the world, and there simply wasn't a place to go to. And so it never crossed my mind that I would leave Cambridge until word reached me about Ralston, and I investigated what was going on, interrogated its first principles, and I couldn't believe what I saw. Here was a new institution, building from a small start, as all institutions must, which was returning ad fontes, as we say in Latin, back to the sources that really matter. So not only was it going to study the arc of the Western tradition right from its very beginnings with Homer, but it was going to do that in the only way it can be done properly, i.e. through the language of ancient Greek. But plenty of places teach ancient Greek, and indeed plenty of places teach the Western canon. So what's so special about that? Fundamentally, by being a new institution with the fleetness of foot and the ability to experiment, it was trying something that literally has not been done ever. It was going to teach ancient Greek and indeed modern Greek, those two poles of the same evolution of one language, immersively, in person, in the very place that gave birth to these traditions, in Greece itself. And through the spoken method, the oral method, the direct method, it has different names and different inflections, 25 people who had no background in ancient Greek and most no background in learning any ancient language, were immersively committing themselves to the shared adventure and challenge of learning to be a community that can't just understand and read, but also speak and create in these languages. And that blew my mind. So I came out to the island of Samos, saw that it was real, saw the incredible advances that were being made only after a few weeks by these students. And just to put that in context, I had spent most of the last 2 decades teaching Latin and ancient Greek to people who have either studied those languages for several years and managed to win a place at Cambridge, or those who had studied Latin but were learning ancient Greek at university and had a huge amount of institutional support for that challenge. But what I saw with Ralston is that the level of progress and indeed the sheer enthusiasm and love in the process of learning language was streets ahead of what I was seeing happen in Cambridge. And I don't think that's either a criticism of the sort of students one finds at Cambridge, nor indeed necessarily a celebration of the brilliance of Ralston students. It's actually a reflection of how Ralston is able to approach the whole challenge of immersing oneself in Greek language and culture properly, the way it should be done. So there really is the one thing that a college is meant to be living here, namely a shared intellectual community which adds up to more than the sum of its parts. And to be a part of that community, which is so young but has such an exciting future ahead of it, is a joy I literally could not have imagined a few years ago. There are many things that make learning a foreign language invaluable as an exercise. Some of those are direct in terms of where that particular language can take you and what you can do with it, but some are indirect, and it's probably easier to begin with those. So whatever one's native language, fundamentally one doesn't come to know it and to understand its workings, and therefore to really master it in a way that allows complete control of what you can and cannot say. You need to get outside of that language. The fish needs to be outside the bowl to see that it was in water. And it's exactly the same linguistically. It doesn't matter which language is native and which second language is learned. That very process has a feedback loop that shows you how your own native tongue works. So anyone studying Latin, Greek, French, German, Spanish, whatever it is able to learn more about their own tongue. But much more importantly, learning a foreign language not just opens up the written resources of a given cultural history, it actually ushers you in to the very mode, not just of expression, but of thought of that culture. When we think to ourselves, we typically think in a verbal way. We have intuitions, we have emotions, but fundamentally, when we formulate our views and we have propositions in our head, those are verbal. And so you literally enter the head as well as the heart of other cultures once you learn to express yourselves in that particular language. Reading is an art, and that art has largely been lost. Not just lost in higher education, but lost more broadly from our culture, at least in the West. And that's a tragedy, because reading offers things that no other route can allow. It's not a route of seeing something visually, be it a film or some act of drama. That won't resonate in the same way as the simple act of reading alone. It's a slow process, it's an immersive process, and it's a transformative one. And the fact is, the evolution of our school system and indeed the decline of our university curricula has meant that either there's too little space for people to read immersively, or more tragically, the community as a whole has ceased to value long-form reading. The reason this is so damaging at the university level is that our schools and indeed our broader culture have stopped encouraging deep, long-form reading. So people genuinely cannot read. By that I mean not that they're illiterate or that they can't make out the words on a page, but studies are now showing that when people in their late teens or as university students read, they're not actually doing anything of the sort. What they're doing is rapidly scanning paragraphs for certain phrases or words that stand out. And their brain is seeking to piece those things together into a coherent argument. Now, that sounds mad because the actual text on the page is itself a coherent argument. But taking sentence by sentence and reading, not knowing quite where a page or an argument is going to end, has become a rare thing to do. At Ralston, there is not just immersive long-form reading, working through choice works of the Western tradition, but many of those works are read in their original ancient Greek or indeed modern Greek language. And that's a slower process, to be sure, and it's a much harder process. But that level of slow, careful, methodical, progressive reading is what actually pays the big dividends to the reader. So the beauty of the Ralston curriculum as it stands is that, as well as being broad, it allows for the depth and the slow pace in the original language for reading to emerge again as the necessary art it should be, not just for every humanities scholar, but for every human. Now, it's a unique thing of the Ralston MA program that the first of 4 terms isn't spent here in beautiful Savannah. It's spent in the Mediterranean. More specifically, it is spent in Greece. Why? Not because it's a jolly holiday to travel abroad and enjoy the Mediterranean sun and sea, nor indeed specifically to see certain sights. It's actually part of a much more holistic attitude to the process of learning, which Ralston believes so deeply in. Not just are texts to be read slowly and carefully, not just are they to be read in the very language in which they were written and formulated, but they are to be read in the very places that shaped the human minds and the artists that created them. So it's an immersion of space and of language. Not of time, because we can't travel back in time, but it's amazing how redolent and evocative it is to read an ancient text in the very setting it was produced or performed, as it may be, if it's a play in the theatre, for instance. And what's so exciting to me, who am professionally a Latinist, is that Ralston is now thinking seriously about launching a parallel stream teaching not just Greek in Greece, but Latin and some Italian in Italy. And we were able to run a 2-month pilot on the same model last year, in which, beginning in Sicily and working our way up through the Bay of Naples, over Mount Vesuvius, and up to Rome, and then with Florence as a Renaissance coda, we were teaching students Latin in the immersive method who had never studied the language before. So we were teaching them from scratch. And exactly the same magical phenomenon emerged, which is that after a few weeks, students are able to read, to speak, to converse and express themselves in a language which fundamentally hasn't changed in its core structure for 2,500 years. And so we brought these languages to life purely by taking them seriously, by approaching them with genuine enthusiasm and respect, and bringing them to life in the places that first bore them. And what's so striking to me is this immersive process where everything adds up to the crucial mission of fully devoting oneself to understanding not just the language, but the people behind the language, was a revelation to me. And to be clear, I have taught Latin and Greek and the classics for 2 decades. That is what I do. But the level of immersion and the change of culture and the shared sense of adventure was like nothing I have seen before. So my time in Italy with Ralston for this pilot program was transformative. So not only did I see for myself that this particular method of teaching language can attain remarkable results with incredible efficiency, but for myself, the flame within me that had always burned with a love for antiquity and for Latin burned far brighter than I knew it could. I came back into the world outside Italy with a greater love, admiration, excitement, and crucially, optimism about the future of not just teaching Latin in the world, but keeping the classical tradition alive in a world that sorely needs it. Now, someone coming across the Ralston program may, perhaps rightly, ask, hang on a minute, why ancient Greek? Why go to Greece? How does that fit in to my life here in the 21st century in the West? It fits in fundamentally. And it's one of the great tragedies of our modern age and one of the great drivers of our crisis of meaning and people feeling they lack place and purpose in the world, that 2 fundamental truths have been either eroded from lack of interest and lack of love, or they've been deliberately and willfully obscured. And those 2 truths are this, that the Judeo-Christian tradition, spanning more than 3,000 years, and specifically the Greco-Roman linguistic traditions of the Greek and Latin languages, are the 2 fundamental threads that allow the arc of the Western tradition to develop into the modern age. And there's no escaping those 2 facts. So why Greece? Well, Greece really is where a genuine birth of new values happens. These things really did emerge in the 8th, 7th, 6th century BC. The world changes, and the Roman Empire eventually expanded to the point of conquering Greece. But for all its virtues and indeed inventiveness, the Romans could not escape the influence of the Greeks. And quite to the contrary, they came around to loving rather than fearing the Greeks. And so the Greek tradition drives almost all of the great artistic, intellectual, literary, philosophical, theological activity of the Roman world. And then from the fall of the Rome in the the Romans in the 5th century AD through to the Renaissance in the 14th, 15th century AD, a millennium later, it's Latin in the West and the humanities broadly conceived in a classical sense that keep handing over the baton of what it means to be a free citizen in the Western world. And wherever you look in the West so-called now, fundamental assumptions of our society are built on that bedrock, a bedrock laid both by the Judeo-Christian tradition and by the Greek and Latin languages, which were not just the origin of many of those things, but the vehicle that allowed them to survive. So Greece is the place you have to start if you want to understand how we got to where we are now over a period of 3 millennia.